Let me ask you a question no one ever dared to ask, but one that's been quietly fermenting at the bottom of your mind. What if everything you do each day means nothing? Not in the philosophical, abstract sense, but in the concrete, immediate, bodily sense. Your schedule, your meetings, your carefully measured goals. What if none of it really belongs to you? It's not about finding some grand spiritual purpose. It's about the mechanical way you rise, obey, and execute, like a well-oiled machine whose heart has long been removed, and deep down, you know something doesn't fit. A quiet dissonance hums through your chest like a question no one wants you to ask. Have you felt it? That strange discomfort that shadows your every decision. The sensation that you're living inside a blueprint you never chose, one everyone else seems to accept without blinking. Maybe it's not stress. Maybe it's a warning. A flare sent up by the part of you still alive beneath the system. Since childhood, they told you to become someone. But no one ever asked if that someone was worth becoming. You were trained to produce, perform, behave, to see value only in output. School wasn't about becoming whole, it was about becoming useful. So you entered the world already bent into a shape that served others. And every time you tried to pause, to breathe, to feel, the world called it laziness. You learned to fear stillness. You learned to measure your worth in how exhausted you were by the end of the day. You were promised meaning if you followed the rules. But now your days blur together like repeated pages of a manual you never agreed to read. You feel the weight, but don't know where it's coming from. The truth is, you've been functioning, not living. And when you do try to stop, the world punishes you with silence. If you're not producing, you don't matter. If you're not advancing, you're falling behind. They never needed chains. Calendars were enough. You built a life they said would make you whole. But your soul feels like a ghost haunting its own house. So maybe the real question isn't what you want to be. Maybe it's this: who are you when you finally stop obeying? You were told that if you're not doing something useful, you're wasting time. But do you see the trap hidden in that belief? Rest becomes laziness, joy becomes immaturity, and contemplation becomes a luxury you can't afford. Who decided that usefulness was the only valid reason to exist? This is where the first crack appears. The suspicion you've ignored for years begins to whisper louder. What if we weren't made for constant labor? What if the entire system of productivity and purpose is nothing but an elegant prison? A cage built from expectations instead of steel? You've felt it, haven't you? That strange guilt when you pause, the anxiety that creeps in during silence. You fill your hours not because you're full of purpose, but because you're afraid of being alone with yourself. That fear isn't failure, it's conditioning. The modern world doesn't teach you to live. It trains you to function. It turns rest into debt, emptiness into panic, and silence into punishment. You weren't born to produce, but you've been shaped into a worker who doesn't know how to simply exist without justifying it. So you chase distractions, you make lists, you overschedule your days. You stay busy not out of clarity, but out of terror, the terror of facing the broken places inside you. Because if you slow down, you'll hear them. And once you hear them, you can't unhear them. And then it happens. That moment when the noise fades, when there's nothing urgent left, when the notifications go silent and the tasks run out. That's when it hits you. The heaviness in your chest, the ache you can't name, the feeling that something essential has been neglected for far too long. You've built your identity around output, around being needed, around serving a machine that doesn't even know your name. But your real self, the one buried beneath the deadlines, has been waiting. Not for your success, not for your performance, just for your presence. You were not designed for constant productivity. You were made to feel, to pause, to marvel. You were made to be bored sometimes, to look at the sky without needing answers, to sit in stillness without earning it. The first step isn't to quit everything or burn it all down. It's to stop measuring your worth in output, to stop apologizing for needing space, to let uselessness be sacred again. Because only there, in what cannot be monetized, will you start to remember what it means to be human. There's a part of you that no longer creates, no longer serves, no longer chases value. You buried it beneath deadlines, beneath calendars, beneath the noise of a life that never stops asking for more. Every time you feel that lingering emptiness, it's not because something is missing. It's because you are missing. That aching silence isn't an error. It's a call, a reminder that your life wasn't designed for efficiency. It was designed for experience, and not the kind that builds resumes or improves skills, the kind that burns, that spills over, that has no measurable use. This is where Georges Bataille enters, a philosopher who didn't care about goals, metrics, or personal growth. He didn't want to teach you how to succeed. He wanted you to unravel, to look where no one dares, to realize that maybe, just maybe, your life doesn't need to be useful at all. He wrote about inner experience as a sacred kind of waste, not indulgence, not distraction, but surrender. The courage to do something purely because it moves you, not because it gets you anywhere. He called it sacred because it refused to serve the system. And this is when the ground begins to shake. Because if your identity has been built on usefulness, what remains when you stop being useful? What happens when the mask of productivity slips and there's no title to hold on to? You start to see what you've been hiding from all along. You begin to question everything. Your job, your roles, your calendar, all feel like clothes that no longer fit. You try to keep performing, but your body knows. Your breath shortens. Your chest tightens. Your soul withdraws. And you begin to wonder who you were before you became who they needed. This is not about quitting your life. It's about seeing clearly. It's about realizing that what you thought was normal might actually be a beautifully decorated cage. And that cage is not made of routines. It's made of meaning that never belonged to you. You don't need to scream. You don't need to run. You just need to stop pretending. To stop building a life for someone you no longer are. The collapse is already happening, and beneath it, there's something waiting. A self that feels before it performs. A soul that exists without asking for permission. That part of you, the one that laughs without reason, cries without explanation, feels without needing to perform, is still there. It's been silenced, buried beneath layers of responsibility. But it hasn't died. You didn't kill it. You were taught to forget it. You were trained to override it with tasks, with roles, with achievements. But it still stirs in moments of unplanned joy, in the hunger for something wild, something unproductive, something utterly free. And the truth is, you don't need more goals. You need more space. Bataille called this the sacred excess, the uncontrollable current inside us that has no purpose but to be. Modern life tells you to regulate it, to calm it, to make it useful. But what if that chaos is the key? What if surrendering to it is the only way to feel whole again? The world tells you to balance work and life. But balance is just another performance, another myth, another spreadsheet disguised as freedom. You don't need balance. You need rupture. You need to shatter the illusion that your value is tied to your productivity. And it's not just your life that's infected. It's your relationships. You start seeing people as resources, opportunities, connections. Conversations become transactions. Intimacy becomes networking. Presence becomes currency. You lose the ability to be with someone without a purpose, to share space without extracting value, to sit in silence without offering entertainment. You forget how to love without proving it, how to exist with someone without producing meaning. Bataille saw this clearly. He didn't preach restraint. He preached explosion. He believed we weren't designed for repetitive cycles, but for eruptions, moments when our inner world overflows the container of what's appropriate. Moments that remind us we're not machines. You weren't made to optimize. You were made to feel, to burn, to tremble, to disappear into the beauty of uselessness without guilt. This isn't regression. It's remembrance. A return to something essential that the system tried to make you forget. And you don't need to explain it to anyone. You don't need to prove it. You just need to listen. To the stillness. To the ache. To the part of you that's been quietly waiting for permission to take up space without being profitable. You say, I'm a doctor. I'm a lawyer. I'm a designer. As if that's the whole story. But what happens when you lose the title? What remains when the role is stripped away? If your worth is tied to your function, then your identity isn't yours. It's rented. They taught you that you are what you do, not what you feel, not what you imagine, not what stirs when everything else goes silent. And so, you became a product, useful while active, discarded when tired. You live inside a system that rewards production and erases presence. You exist as long as you generate. You're validated when you perform. But the moment you pause, the machine forgets you. You become a glitch, a slowdown, a liability. And the worst part? This logic infects your relationships. You start measuring people by what they offer. You network instead of connect. You collect names instead of stories. You become too busy to feel, too efficient to care. How many times have you kept someone around because they were useful? How many times has someone done the same to you? We've lost the art of being together without purpose, of sharing time without return, of sitting in silence and letting that be enough. Bataille knew that the human soul doesn't crave structure. It craves eruption. He spoke of inner experience not as a tool, but as a sacred storm. Something that defies productivity. Something that exists simply because it must. He wasn't asking you to burn your life down. He was asking you to feel it differently. To see that your need to control everything is often a disguise for fear. Fear of losing status. Fear of being forgotten. Fear of meeting yourself. But the real risk isn't letting go of control. The real risk is living a life so tightly managed that you forget how to be. That you forget how to cry without explanation, how to rest without apology, how to just exist without earning it. You were not meant to be efficient. You were meant to be real, messy, unfinished, alive. The parts of you that don't fit the schedule are not your weakness. They're your truth. And they're still there, waiting for you to stop managing and start remembering. You weren't born for back-to-back meetings. You weren't made for calendars that stretch beyond the present moment. But now, your life is blocked into boxes. And each box has a name. Deadline, deliverable, duty, debt. You no longer scream, you send emails. You don't disappear, you mark yourself away. You don't cry, you stay on track. Your rebellion has been pacified with alarms and reminders. The system doesn't need fences, it only needs structure. A full calendar is more powerful than a locked door. A notification can control you more precisely than a command. And the cruelest part, you become the warden of your own cell. You reinforce the walls by staying busy. You distract yourself from the ache by filling your hours. You fear silence because it might show you what's broken. So you chase noise, stimulation, checklists, not because they bring peace, but because they delay the moment when peace would demand you feel. You call it focus, but it's escape. And when everything finally stops, when the task list empties, when no one needs anything, when the room goes quiet, that's when it happens. That sting in your chest, that tightness in your throat, that pulse of grief without a name. You don't know what's wrong, but something is. You feel incomplete in a way that can't be solved with productivity. That ache is your real self knocking, asking why you never let it breathe. Why did you keep it locked in the basement of your life? Why did you worship movement and fear stillness? Why did you build an identity so fragile it collapsed when no one was watching? But it's not too late. There's another way. It won't be easy. It won't be fast. It won't be comfortable. But it will be real. And it begins with a choice so quiet most people miss it. To stop obeying. To stop treating rest like a reward. To stop searching for meaning only in output. And instead, to feel your way back to yourself. It starts with small acts, not revolutions. Listening to a song without multitasking, walking without a destination, sitting without a screen, doing something for no reason, simply because you want to. Because in that chosen uselessness, in that surrendered, sacred pause, another kind of life begins to breathe. One that isn't at the service of anything. One that doesn't need to justify its place. One that simply is. You don't need to earn rest. You don't need to prove anything to deserve stillness. That's where real freedom begins. Not the freedom to do whatever you want, but the freedom to not need to justify your being. Bataille called it the shame of excess, because the system trained you to feel guilty for not producing. But shame is just the doorway, the first wall. And beyond it, something wild begins to stir. You're standing at that wall now, with guilt in one hand and possibility in the other. Don't wait for the world to give you permission. It won't. Don't expect others to understand. They won't. They're still asleep, still believing their value lives in output, still chasing worth like a paycheck. But you've already seen too much. You felt the fracture, heard the voice. You can't pretend you didn't. You can't go back. And the question now isn't theoretical, it's existential. Do you dare to become useless? Do you dare to reclaim the part of yourself that serves no function, but means everything? Because if you've made it this far, it's not by accident. You're not here because you were bored. You're here because something in you, deep, old, and patient, is waking up. Even if you don't know how to say it. Even if you can't explain it. Even if it doesn't make sense yet. There's a pulse inside you that no longer wants to perform, no longer wants to live for weekends, no longer accepts survival as a lifestyle. And here's the most powerful truth of all, that part of you doesn't need answers. It doesn't want steps. It doesn't care about strategies. It just wants one thing: space, silence, a moment that isn't monetized. But I'll tell you something few have the courage to admit. When you choose to stop producing for the system begins to lose its hold on you. And when that happens, you begin to return to yourself. The system won't collapse with noise. It crumbles quietly, from within, the moment you stop believing it defines your worth. You won't notice the shift all at once. It comes in whispers, in the days you stop apologizing for resting. One morning, you forget to check the clock. One afternoon, you feel no need to justify your stillness. Slowly, without fanfare, your soul reclaims space. And in that space, something ancient begins to breathe. You remember how to be. Not to perform, not to improve, just to exist. To sit without intention. To laugh without reason. To watch the sky without translating it into metaphor. And here's the quiet revolution. Real change doesn't shout. It unfolds in the refusal to hurry, in the courage to do nothing, in the moment you realize you don't have to deserve your own presence. You don't have to escape to the mountains or delete everything. You only have to stop obeying the logic that says usefulness is everything. That says silence is failure. That says rest is only earned. Let the world keep spinning. Let it burn if it must. Dance in your room with no reason, no rhythm, no audience. Because that dance, clumsy, unplanned, sacred, might be the first thing you've done in years that actually belongs to you. You won't become a hermit. You won't lose everything. You'll just start remembering what was yours before they named you. You'll start reclaiming a self that was never meant to be efficient. And yes, it may scare you. It should. Fear here is not a mistake. It's a sign. A signal that you're crossing into a space where few dare to go. A space where you no longer exist to be seen, but to be whole. So here's my invitation. Not for motivation, not for goals, but for a mark, a ritual. If this spoke to something you can't quite name, go to the comments and write this. I'm not here to serve, I am here to feel. Let it echo. Let it be your thread back to the self you buried. And if something broke open in you, if something moved that you thought was gone, subscribe. Not for more content, but for more interruptions, for more sacred pauses. This space isn't for everyone. It's for the tired, for the restless, for the ones who know there must be another way to be. If you're one of them, stay. Now close the screen. Put the phone away. Don't think. Don't try to optimize this moment, just feel. Be. For 5 quiet minutes. And if the world catches fire around you, let it. Because in that useless, beautiful stillness, you'll finally remember what it means to be alive.